Okay, hi there guys. So today's presentation is on advanced nutrition and some of the common myths I get from a lot of people. I see a lot of clients during the week and they often ask the same sorts of questions all the time, so I thought I'd do this presentation and hit all the myths in one go. My name's Harry Silo, obviously, working as a personal trainer and group fitness instructor for Silo Fitness. Let's crack straight on. Okay, so a couple of housekeeping things. I'm going to use this term today, macronutrients, which describes fats, carbohydrates and protein, so the big parts of any food group. It's not going to be micronutrients, I'm not going to touch on those really, which describe your coppers, zincs, those kind of things, which the body still needs, but I really want to just concentrate on the macronutrients today. I'm going to say obesity is defined as a BMI greater than 30, as defined by the NHS and a lot of other medical institutions. It's just to describe what someone's BMI like and how their overall health is. So we'll talk about that when we come to it. Nutrition's a massive subject and there's going to be lots of facts and lots of opinions. I'm going to try and differentiate between the two because obviously facts are what textbooks say and what medical professions say, and opinions are clearly my own experiences and what I've found in my travels. Okay, and as nutrition is such a big subject, I'm going to focus on weight loss and less so on the health related issues. Clearly they're very important, but the majority of my clients, I'd say at least 90% to almost 100%, want some form of weight loss. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this presentation. And I'm just repeating what I've just said. It's a massive topic, so some of the areas are deliberately brief. Okay, so if you do want to ask anything else, there's obviously questions at the end of this, or you can obviously email me. Okay, right, let's get started. So what is the problem? So a brief overview with the issue in this country. I do like that picture. Obviously it's not just this country, it's the developing nations generally. In the 1960s, USA, 13% adult obesity. In the 1980s, this climbed to 15%, and then we start getting stats on the UK, start seeping through. 1991, it's increased again. 2001, you can kind of see where this is going. 2010 was the last recorded data that I've got, and you can just see in the USA, clearly it's a steady increase, and increase, and increase. Okay, and I quite like this picture as well. It's kind of what we've evolved into. This kind of man drinking the fast food shake or whatever. Our genetic makeup hasn't really changed, but clearly the foods we've been eating over this time period have vastly changed, and that's bound to be where some of the problems lie. Quite like this statistic as well. It's if you look at the UK ones, just as a side note, 21% of males and 24% of females, and then 2010, 26% of males and 26% females. It's actually the same in 2010, which only suggests to me that men are as fat as women, and likewise. So, some of the myths I'm going to cover in this presentation. The calorie in versus calorie out to maintain weight. Yeah, sounds logical, but I'm going to describe certain instances where this may not be the case. Low calorie diets, which are tied very closely with this first point. Low fat diets, low carb diets, and fad diets or fasting diets. I mean, I get a range of these from clients that turn up to me, and you know, I have to describe similar things each time, and I'm going to explain why I think each of those really doesn't have its place for humans. So we'll get through that. Eating every 2 to 3 hours. This one I'm going to talk about less so. But unless you're trying to get size, i.e. bulk, muscle, and this is generally guys, then eating every 2 hours, we wouldn't have done that in nature, and it's not really natural for us to do it now necessarily. Again, this is an opinion, but I'll get to that. And drinking 8 glasses of water, we've all heard this one, and it's been smashed by the media quite recently, so I'll go through that. Right, the country's current approach to diet. This is, or was, the food pyramid. You'll see this in many different forms. But since the 1950s, just after the war, the country needed some form of general advice to give to the public. This came from the government, and the food pyramid was considered, and has been considered, a good form of diet to give to the UK population. So you can see there that the biggest group at the bottom are your grains. Obviously then above there is your vegetables and fruits, slightly less, and then your sort of amber or cautious groups where your milk and dairy and meat groups, and right at the top would be your fats and confectionaries and other things like that. But the interesting thing is that this has been around for 40, 50 years, and still yet you saw the numbers gradually increasing. So there must be something wrong with this. If everyone's eating like this, then there's got to be a fundamental problem with it. This is what's been released recently. 2005, I believe this came out, and it's called the Healthy Eating Plate. Now, I completely back this approach. I mean, the Healthy Eating Plate much more appropriate compared to the food guide pyramid, and you'll see later in my explanations with the diet why the Healthy Eating Plate is much more applicable. Some writing there you probably can't read. I suggest that most people look at it, because you've got a massive portion of vegetables here. You've got whole grains, which are about a quarter, healthy proteins about a quarter, and some fruits there. Some healthy oils, and obviously your water. Differences between the two, where you can see the grains at the bottom. Obviously the grains in the Healthy Eating Plate are a lot less. The vegetables and fruit account for half the diet, so much more than this portion here on the food pyramid. And generally I haven't got a problem with this. This is a very good thing to be telling people what to do. Very good. But again, we'll come back to that. So now, these are some of the typical food plans that I get from people. And I thought it would be best to show these to see what the actual issue is. And then there are a variety of plans I get from different styles of people. If we have a look at Diet 1, this is probably the most common. 2 slices of toast with low-fat spread. Pasta salad and a packet of crisps and a handful of raisins. Pretty typical office lunch. No snacks either side, because snacking's bad, apparently. Dinner, noodles with veg. Snack 3, a low-fat yoghurt or the dessert with that, and coffee and tea throughout. Total calories roughly 1600. Diet 3, I'll come back to Diet 2. Diet 3 is very similar. Kellogg's Special K cereal with skim milk, a cereal bar, some sushi and some Snacker Jacks. Again, another typical office sort of meal. Another cereal bar, because obviously they're very good for you. Not completely convinced by that. Beans on toast in the evening, something fairly light, and snack, small piece of chocolate, and drinks, fruit juice. If you notice, the drinks across here are just generally what I see in most people's diet. Coffee, tea, wine, fruit juice, and Diet Coke. Again, Diet 3 is even less calories, 1350. And one of my favourites is Diet 4. This is from a guy that I have, a male that I train. And breakfast, he doesn't have any breakfast, because breakfast is for wimps. He has a banana during a meeting. He's on the go, so he has a meeting. He has a banana just before the meeting. Lunch, doesn't get time for lunch because this meeting goes on till about 3-4 o'clock. So I've put in snack 2, which is when he actually eats eventually, which is like a chicken sandwich on brown bread. He just managed to go out and get a sandwich, and then in the evening he stops on the way home and gets fish chips and mushy peas, and he has a Mars bar for an afters and washes it all down with Diet Coke. And calorie-wise, not too bad. Oh, excuse me. Calorie-wise, not too bad, but you know, there's a lot of issues with that diet. That kind of, you know, lots of fats, lots of carbohydrate, not a lot of protein, not a lot of vegetables, and it's all, you know, heavily weighted later in the evening. My main problem with diets 1 and 3, as you'll see later on, is there's a lot of carbohydrate in that diet. There's not a lot of protein. And a real fundamental point to all of this, which is coming up, is that low protein and high carb diets generally make humans maintain weight or gain weight. And that's what I want to show you on the next slide. All those diets I've split up into those macronutrients. So carbohydrates, fats and proteins. And if you notice with all of them, apart from Diet 4, they're all very heavily carb based. So, you know, around 60, 55, 60 again, or 70% carbohydrate. Fats, pretty minimum, because, you know, a lot of, especially ladies, try and avoid fats. And proteins, they vary here, but generally quite on the low side for what I'd like to see people eat. The actual top, the fella, Diet 4, is actually quite a nice balance. Maybe a few more fats than I'd like to see, but better than average. It was just the time of day that this guy was eating that I wasn't happy with. And there we go. So I've said there, macronutrient balance. So what have the diets got in common? And it's generally the carbohydrate balance is a bit out. So I'm going to go through this now. Too many carbohydrates, especially sugars. I mean, refined sugar has no place in a human diet, really. And I'm not saying you shouldn't eat it, you know, but it doesn't do any favours for the human as a you know, from a biological point of view. So where they can be avoided, great. Too few proteins. Proteins make the body a fat metabolizer. Protein is good for humans. You know, it doesn't matter what form it comes in. You can obviously tell there are some better forms of protein out there compared to ones that haven't got complete chains of amino acids. I won't go into that too much, but good quality protein will always outweigh the poorer quality stuff. And I've just put in a couple of comments to each of these. Carbohydrates make the body a fat storer. That's the insulin response to the body. Very briefly, insulin gets shot out when we consume carbohydrate, and it's that insulin that then stores those carbohydrates as fat if our glycogen stores in the body are full. And it doesn't take many carbohydrates to fill that glycogen store, and therefore too many carbohydrates will just mean you store more fat. The proteins, like I've said, make you a fat metabolizer, so it's like a win-win, isn't it? If the carbohydrates go down and protein goes up, the more fat that's being metabolized and less fat that's being stored. Too many bad fats, you saw that in that Diet 4. Trans and factory-made saturated fats have a negative effect on the body. There's no doubt about that. You know, trans fats have been known to have twice the effect on cholesterol. Oh, lots of different things. The fat level in people's blood shoots through the roof. But saturated fat in natural forms is actually good for humans. You know, full fat butter and a lot of the good quality meats, you know, beef and pork and steaks, that kind of thing. I get a lot of people that say that they're very fatty though. But yeah, if they're a good quality source, the natural fats that are in those are not that bad for us. And, you know, you can get your fats from good quality cuts of meat. And then just a quick point on some of the drinks. I mean, far too many people nowadays drink too many stimulants, and it comes in the form of coffee, Red Bull and Coke. So you've really got to watch the amount of stimulants you have. I mean, one of the side effects, particularly with weight loss, is that stimulants stress the body. You know, they get the adrenaline going, and when the body's in that state, it generally doesn't like to metabolize fats. It wants to keep onto its fat stores when the body's stressed. So it doesn't just go for stimulants. Obviously, working too hard and overtraining can have an effect on metabolizing fat. So just watch out for that. Right, okay, so I've gone through a few of these points anyway, but it's nice to have them presented on a slide. Every time you consume a carb, doesn't matter what colour it is, sugar, refined, brown, white, green, purple, insulin is released. So I get a lot of people say, you know, brown toast, brown pita breads, that kind of thing, and whilst they are good, the only benefit they have in a fat loss diet is that they have slightly more fibre. So I'm happy with that, but really, you still want to watch the amount of carbohydrate you're consuming. So whether it's brown or white, it still wants to be reduced. I've mentioned there, insulin is designed to absorb energy from food into the bloodstream to be stored as glycogen in the body. As soon as that glycogen store is topped up in the body, which again doesn't take a lot, it could be a decent shake or a small handful of rice or a big portion of salad, it'll fill up, and then the rest of the carbohydrate you're consuming will just be stored as fat. Overproduction of insulin also stresses the pancreas and kills it. Alright, bit melodramatic there, but that's what causes type 2 diabetes. So high carb diets are more likely to cause fat storage and type 2 diabetes. You're constantly stressing the pancreas, it's constantly having to release insulin, and eventually it just dries up. It just can't cope with it anymore. Protein has the opposite effect of this carbohydrate, so creates that win-win that I mentioned. Okay, so we're going to hit each of these myths now. First one's the negative energy balance. So that calorie in, calorie out. And I get this one a lot. If my body requires 2,000 calories per day, and this is just an example, and I eat 1,500 calories a day, then I create a deficit of 500 calories and will lose weight, won't I? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Sort of the answer. Clearly calorie deficits are required for weight loss. That's clear. So cardio exercises and creating a small calorie deficit through your diet is necessary. That's clear. But real low calorie diets filled with sugar and stimulants will stress the body and force the body to store more fat. So what I find is when people have really low calorie diets, they'll be drinking Diet Coke, which is plenty of caffeine. They'll have coffee with sweeteners, again very unnatural for our bodies. And they'll be just constantly under stress with their body. They tend to be those sort of individuals, in an office workplace, they're constantly stressed, their heart rate's elevated, then they'll top it up with more coffee and stimulants, and it's just not good. And they'll also generally have low fat in their diet, so quite high carb lunches, it'll be rice, it'll be pasta, because low fat is sold as being good. And it is in certain instances, but not throughout an entire diet plan. So not necessarily true, this one. Myth number 2 leads me on to low calorie. I mean, you've already heard me say it. A deficit of calories is required under your base metabolic rate, but only slightly for most of the adult population. Approximately 200 to 500 calories is a good benchmark to use. Again, this is probably more opinion than fact. But it's just my experience. A small frame person only really needs 200-300 loss on their diet because they'll be on low food or less food anyway. 500 calories for a high muscle or quite large individuals to start, because we don't want that massive, drastic loss, which forces that body into the starvation mode, and it doesn't want to offer its fat as fuel. So just bear that in mind with low calorie diets. You don't want to go too low. Myth number 3, my favourite, the low fat diet. So I've already said, when people lower the amount of fat in their diet, it's not the protein that goes up, it's the carbohydrate that goes up, because carbohydrate, generally easier to get hold of, it's cheaper, and it generally tastes nicer to most humans. We crave that carbohydrate quite easily, and we already know that high carbohydrates lead to high fat storage, and I get this one a lot. Fat makes you fat, but it doesn't really. Alright, a high fat diet isn't really appropriate for people trying to lose weight, but then neither's a low fat diet. So the reason why this is one of my favourite myths is that I hear a lot of healthy, or I see a lot of healthy marketed products, and just want you to have a think of a few that you've either bought or you hear about or you see on signs in health food shops, anywhere like that, and they market it as healthy, and they're just trying to sell you something, unfortunately. So let's go through a few. Cereal's low fat, and pretty much I've got to say 50-60% of people start their day off with a bowl of cereal, or what is a bowl of carbohydrate. And we know with carbohydrate, especially in the morning, it's going to shoot up your sugar levels. You'll have that energy fix for about an hour, 2 hours, and then you're going to be starving by about 10, 11 o'clock, especially if you're an office worker. You might see that hunger through and wait until lunchtime, but lunchtime, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, you are ravenous, and then you will just generally go for what's handy, what's nearby. So cereal's not necessarily good. I hate them as products, to have them at breakfast time. To have them at any time. Just a bowl of sugar, really, at the end of the day. Yogurt. Okay, not too bad. Especially, Greek yogurt, or plain yogurt. But it's actually quite high in sugars. Any dairy-based product that's made from milk has got lactose in it. And whilst yogurt does contain a bit of protein, it's got a lot of carbohydrate in it as well. So good as a recovery food, but not necessarily as a healthy type snack, because it's got quite a lot of sugars in it. Cereal bars, my favourite. The Special K ones that are 90 calories, and the small ones are 80 calories here and 110 calories here. But again, they're just a bar of carbohydrate. So as a snack, not brilliant. I'd rather see someone have a handful of nuts, some blueberries, a small piece of fruit. It's got to be better for you than what is just some grains that's generally topped up with sugar. Smoothies. Well, I'd rather you eat the piece of fruit, or 2 or 3 pieces of fruit. I mean, it's quite a lot. But smoothies, the problem with them, when you blend fruits, you ruin the fibre that they naturally have. So we lose that to start. And also having the fruit in liquid form means that it's super, super sweet, and it has a really instant reaction with your insulin levels. So it'll give you that hunger craving a couple of hours later that we want to try and avoid. So smoothies aren't the answer to get fruit down you. Rather you have natural, low GI fruits anyway. Pasta, low fat, so it's good. But we've seen that with pasta, ramps up the insulin levels as well. Dried fruit. Now I don't mind it. It's good, especially after exercise. It's brilliant. But most dried fruits will increase the insulin levels quite dramatically. They're very high on the glycemic index because their sugars are allowed to intensify in that drying process, generally from the sun. So they're quite sweet, aren't they, most dried fruits? Raisins, apricots. Good for you. There's a lot of benefits there. But try and have them just before or just after exercise when your sugar levels are going to be low. Bananas, similar thing. High glycemic index, quite sweet, about 6 teaspoons of sugar in a banana, and someone sitting behind the desk just doesn't need all that energy and sugar whilst they're sitting there. But, yet again, it's classed as a healthy snack. Rice, similar to pasta, very energy dense. You need a small amount of it, and really try and reduce it to 5 or 6 portions a week, but a small handful, really not the ladles that I see on people's plates. And the last one's muesli, very closely related to cereal, because muesli is seen as healthy. The Alpen advert is a guy at the moment. I know this has come out in 2012. There's a man on the telly who does his workout and then has a healthy bowl of muesli. Again, not too bad if you're then going to do high intensity exercise in the morning. But if you're an average Joe getting up and having a bowl of carbohydrate again, just not ideal. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Myth 4, the low carb diet. Again, another one of my favourites, sometimes referred to as the Atkins diet. So I get this. If carbs are so bad, then just don't eat them. I've just described to you that, low fat people eat more carbohydrate. And if carbohydrates are so bad, Harry, then I won't eat them. We'll have a low carb diet. I'm doing Atkins and I've lost 1 stone in 2 weeks. I get this one all the time, and it's infectious because ladies talk and they'll talk to other ladies, and this will just get out of control. The issues with these 2 statements: high protein diets require a lot of antioxidants to process in the body. So if you're having lots of protein, and that could be for muscle building for guys or for ladies who've heard of the Atkins diet, I know it's very stereotypical, it's just the experience I have with male and female clients. You need a lot of fruit and veg to process a lot of that protein. Okay. Obviously with the low carb you're having more protein and more fats, and high fat diets aren't really suitable for certain individuals, particularly trying to lose weight. I tend to find also that the protein that people consume is of poorer quality, so burgers, fry-ups, poor quality oils, sausages, cheap sausages and that, and the fat that's within those, again, isn't ideal, and it's not what Atkins actually said. It wasn't fry-ups and cheese and dairy, so people just need to watch out for that, because you can actually make yourself quite ill off a high protein diet, because the body goes into something that's called ketosis. And it's that can poison the body sometimes. Quite an interesting fact, this one, that I tell people. I say the body runs on proteins, fats and carbohydrates. So all those 3 macronutrients. The brain only runs on carbohydrate. So you notice people, or if you've ever tried the Atkins diet yourself, after about, I'd say 2-3 weeks, it's just not sustainable because your brain goes to mush. And you can hear people talk, they're just very no, they have no energy, they really struggle getting up, they struggle with their workouts, so again, it's just not sustainable. Okay, and the last other myths that I mentioned right at the beginning: fad diets, eating every 2 and 3 hours, fasting diets and 8 glasses of water. Well, a fad diet, it's all in the name, isn't it? It's a fad. It's not sustainable. It'll kick round for 6 to 8 weeks. You might stick to it for 3 or 4, maybe the full 8 weeks, lose some weight, but as soon as you're done with it, you're back on your ordinary plan, and you might put on a bit of weight. Now, I think this is because you've restricted your body's natural diet in some way or form, and then when you start eating normally again, it wants to hold on to a bit of that fat, you know, because it doesn't know if you're going to do that fad diet again. Again, that's opinion, not necessarily fact. Eating every 2 to 3 hours. Bodybuilders, yes. I've put there Mrs. Smith, no. So Mrs. Smith or Joe Blogs, not necessarily. You know, 5 meals a day is good. So we're talking 3 big meals and snacks in between, like 2 healthy snacks, but only if necessary. Don't feel like you have to constantly eat all the time to keep your metabolism up. Trying to put on muscle, then yes, it is very appropriate, but not for the average Joe. It really isn't. Fasting diets, I mean, were you listening before? They just don't work. They're like fad diets, you know, no calories. It's just wrong for humans to not eat. It's very drastic. And drinking 8 glasses of water a day, not ideal for blanketing a whole adult population. So you got 50 kilogram Mrs. Smith should drink the same as 85 kilogram Harry, the super sophisticated charismatic personal trainer. I don't know how that got in there, but I should drink as much as Mrs. Smith, and that isn't the case really, is it? So I'm going to give you a couple of pointers now. So, most important thing, if you've got a pen or a paper, I'll let you get it now, because this is probably the most useful information out of the whole thing that you can summarise. 6 key points to take away with you from this seminar. Eat a balanced diet of 40% carbs, 30% protein and 30% fats. Okay? Carbs aren't the enemy, fats aren't the enemy. If they were, humans would just be eating protein. So out of all those diets that I said, you know, low fat, low carb, low this, low that, would you believe that the body works best on an even balance? That's roughly a third each, isn't it, of all the macronutrients? And that's represented and replicated, I should say, in other parts of nature. You know, just a balance throughout. So that's what humans should aim for. Hydration. So rather than 8 glasses for everyone, 0.033 times your body weight. So for example, for a 60 kilogram lady or male, times that by 0.033 and that comes out at 1.98 litres. So let's round that to 2 litres. Hydration is essential for fat loss, so hydration is a key one to get right. So carbohydrate we want to bring down, as I've said there, we want to aim for about 40% carbohydrate, and if most people are coming to me with 60-70% carbohydrate diets, then I'm going to limit it to about 30 grams for every meal and snack. So if I said 5 or 3 meals plus your 2 snacks, that's 5 small meals, and you can have maximum 30 grams of carb for every meal, and that totals 150 grams a day. You can bring it down under that. I mean, personally, I don't eat that many really rich, dense carbohydrates. Mine mainly come from sweets, confectionery. I do have the odd confectionery item, and I will have a small amount of brown carbohydrates, so it will be pasta or rice, but it's very small amounts. We're talking like handfuls, if that, and it's quite 2 or 3 times a week. So you can aim for 10 or 20 grams if you want to speed up weight loss. Eat as many vegetables as you can. Seriously, just avoid the starchy tubers and the root vegetables like potatoes, yams, and maybe to a lesser extent carrots, but certainly all the salad items. I really, don't like seeing people portion control that. Spinach, tomatoes, onions, bit of garlic, herbs. Oh my goodness, there's so much. Just eat as much as you can, because your body will naturally fill up on this kind of thing, and they're so good for you if you're doing lots of exercise. I've put in there, vegetables are important, fruits are as well, but avoid the real high glycemic tropical fruits. If you want a glycemic load or glycemic index of common fruits, come and see me, or you can type it in on the internet. There's quite a lot of charts out there. Go for the lower ones, so apples, blueberries, some berries, that kind of thing, as your snacks ideally. They're very good for that, fruits. Include a source of protein into every meal. So breakfast, I generally use eggs or good quality sausages or pork medallions, that kind of thing. For lunch, I might have chicken. For the evening, I might have a piece of steak. There's always a source of protein in there. It's good for repair, and it's good for weight loss because protein is natural for humans to consume. Okay. I mean, I've got a point for vegetarians. I mean, obviously you can't eat the meat where a lot of the full chain amino acid proteins are. But I do have a couple of vegetarian clients, and I do diet plans for them. You need to use your pulses and your dairy a lot more to get your protein. So it is still possible. It's still possible. And again, prepare your own meals and avoid pre-prepared. So I described earlier that person who would have the bowl of cereal, they'd skip through a snack, and they'd get to about 12, 1 o'clock, and they'd be starving and ravenous. So they'd go for the first thing that was there, a massive jacket potato or a sandwich with crisps and drink and 2 chocolate bars, that kind of thing. But if you prepare your meal and you've had your higher protein snacks and meals earlier in the day, you shouldn't feel like that, or I certainly don't myself. And so you get into the habit of preparing your own meals, because everything you buy out has a high carbohydrate food source with it. You think anything you buy generally has a carbohydrate with it. So avoid the pre-prepared where you can, because it's the salts, the sugars, the saturated fats, the trans fats, the bad ones that we want to try and avoid. Okay. Lastly, there's no such thing as a bad or good food. I get that asked a lot. Are bananas good? Is Coke good? Is this good? Is this bad? Well, it's all in context, isn't it? So if I had a banana straight after a workout, I would say that was a good recovery carbohydrate. Banana behind a desk, like I've said before, maybe not so ideal because it's 6 teaspoons of sugar that are not getting used. But isn't what's another one I get used a lot? Isn't pasta good? Isn't it good? Low fat? Well, not really, not particularly. It just depends when it's being eaten. Time and a place for all that kind of thing. It depends on the context, in summary. And something to think about. How does exercise fit into all this? So we've talked about nutrition, but exercise and mainly sugar levels. Exercise brings down sugar levels. So if you have got a fairly high carbohydrate diet, or you're trying to reduce it, high intensity exercise will lower sugar levels, so you can get away with eating slightly more carbohydrate, or store less fat through eating carbohydrate, whichever way you look at it. Okay, I'll just skip through. My next presentation is going to be on core training. Get a lot of questions about this, the sort of questions I get. What is the core? Because a lot of people just point to their stomachs. Effective moves for training that. How to conduct the moves safely. Do I do them fast? Do I do them slow? Do I use a weight? Do I do them at the start, the end of the workout? So I get a lot of questions on core training, and hopefully that'll be with you very soon. At this point, there'd be any questions, so if you want to email me, feel free. It's silofitness@hotmail.co.uk. I've been Harry Silo, and thanks for listening, guys. Speak to you soon. Bye.